take 3 of my Vinyl Tag 2020. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get started with my 20 questions. Number 1 is best find of 2019. That will be, it's 2 albums. Shiva's Headband, psychedelic band from Austin. In the 60s, they were here in Austin the same time as the 13th Floor Elevators. They were led by a fiddle player. Very hard to find albums. I was fortunate enough to be at the right place at the right time. Somebody had dropped off a big chunk of their Austin collection, and I could not let those guys get separated. Yeah, Shiva's Headband. Look for them. Very, very hard to find. My favorite album of 2019. I don't really buy new albums, but one that is by one of my good buddies, John, of the Golden Roses, and their debut album, Terlingo Graveyard. Country, western, honky-tonk. You like Buck Owens, Merle Haggard. This is in the vein of them. Jerry Reed. John's a hell of a guitar player. They're about ready to make a new album. So yeah, follow them, the Golden Roses, and the goldenrosesatx.com. Novelty album, William Burroughs and Kurt Cobain, The Priest They Called Him. This is made in 93. Burroughs kind of reads an excerpt from his book, The Exterminator. I think that was kind of entitled The Junkie's Christmas, and in the background, it's spoken over Kurt Cobain playing kind of a spooky little rendition of Silent Night. It's really, really good. And this fun little thing. There's Chris Novoselic on the front, and then on the back, it's they're etched signatures. Burroughs on the top and Cobain on the bottom. But Cobain kind of spelled his name different every time he signed it. 4, homage. Willie Nelson, his homage to Ray Price. And here's Ray Price's. So here they are. B-side, deep cut. Stephen Fromholtz, his first solo album, Remember My Own Time on Capitol, came out in 1976. There's lots of great songs on this B-side. Bears, which was recorded by his good friend Lyle Lovett. I'd Have to Be Crazy, which Willie recorded in 76 on his album A Sound in Your Mind. That went to number 2 on the charts, and later on went to be double platinum because Willie put it on 2 albums. But the song I want to highlight on this is Late Night Neon Shadows, a song that Stephen writes about Nashville and kind of how cutthroat it is. And yeah, Stephen Fromholtz, Room in Your Own Time. I'm currently making a documentary on Stephen Fromholtz, and Stephen was at the forefront of the 70s music scene here in Austin. You don't really ever hear his name, but he was there before kind of everybody else arrived, and him with a chunk of other people, or names that you don't really hear about the outlaw scene that was coined. Yeah. Something Funky, Trouble Funk. My good buddy John that I mentioned earlier in the Golden Roses is from DC. Trouble Funk is from DC, and they started their own kind of subgenre of funk, which is called go-go music. This is their first album. I've got another one of theirs. This is on Sugar Hill. Came out in 78, I think. Maybe a little bit later. But, yeah, from the late 70s, early 80s. Trouble Funk. Weird Shelf Buddies. Ry Cooder. Alice Cooper. That was their band I've seen. This one was just as of late. Ramblin' Jack Elliott. Because of the documentary that I'm making on Stephen Fromholtz, Jack and Steve spent a good amount of time together in San Francisco in the 60s during the Summer of Love. And for those of you who don't know, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, one got his name, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, from Odetta's mom, from a time that Jack would go visit Odetta, and it was Odetta's mom that called Ramblin' Jack Ramblin'. But Jack was best friends with Woody Guthrie, was inspired by Woody, took Woody's music over to Europe and made it famous over in Europe, came back and lived with Woody in New York for a long time. And then when Woody came down with Huntington's disease, which eventually ended up taking Woody, Woody spent a good dozen or so years of his life in a hospital. One afternoon, Jack went to the hospital, and there's this young kid there, Bob Dylan, who's sitting at Woody Guthrie's bedside. And it was there that Bob Dylan would learn from Jack and Woody, and if Jack is kind of the bridge between Woody and Bob Dylan, but there would be no Bob Dylan if there was no Ramblin' Jack Elliott. Wish I had an OG copy, but have a repress. The Louvin Brothers, Satan is Real. I have about 11 or 12 of the original Louvin Brothers presses. I do not have that one. A discography that I own. I'm not gonna get all of them, but it is Willie Nelson. I think I have around 53 or 54 of his albums, but he's got around, I think, 150 studio albums. So I'm about a third of the way there. Unique Center label. This one took some thinking, but then when I found it, it was no-brainer for me. It's Dead Kennedys, Alternative Tentacles. Dead Kennedys. Great, great album. One of my favorite albums that I own. Pre-band. Them. Van Morrison. Let me see here. Musical book. An Improbable Rise of Redneck Rock, which came out, I think, in 73 or 74. 1973 was the year of the Big Bang here in Austin. That kind of started the progressive country and later renamed as the outlaw country. And if you've been to Nashville and seen the Outlaws and Armadillos exhibit, it's all in this book. And this scene started here in Austin in 1973. Everybody's albums came out in 73. But progressive rock is what it was coined first by Chet Flippo of Rolling Stone, and none of the musicians really liked that term. That was kind of all folk music to them, singer-songwriter, and then just that went electric. And was later almost killed by cocaine, and then cocaine is kind of where they got the outlaw title. But Jen Reed is the author of this. Jan has become a good friend of mine in the making of my documentary, and Stephen Fromholtz. Stephen Fromholtz has the biggest chapter in this book. But for any of you curious about the Austin music scene of the 70s, people like Michael Martin Murphey, B.W. Stevenson, Rusty Weir, Steve Fromholtz, Waylon, Willie, Jerry Jeff Walker, you name it, all these guys. This is the Bible down here in Texas, especially Austin. Scott Newton has all the photos in this, and Scott has been the Austin City Limits photographer since day one. So, The Improbable Rise of Redneck Rock. Underrated album. This one was super easy for me. Billy Joe Shaver. Old Fine Vidimers Like Me came out in 1973. Billy Joe Shaver is one of the greatest songwriters of all time. Let's pet my dog here. Waylon Jennings' Honky Tonk Heroes album that also came out around 1973, 1974. Forgive me if I'm wrong. All of those songs were Billy Joe Shavers. So Waylon owes quite a lot to Billy Joe for that album. Batting average, this one was really easy. John Prine, this is his first album. His first album alone should give him about a 500 batting average. Yeah. And for those of you who don't have his new Tree of Forgiveness album, you need to go out and get it. I think John was just nominated for a Lifetime Achievement Award for a Grammy. It's kind of having a renaissance with his career. Same album, different cover. I had a lot of these, but Waylon Jennings is one that kind of came to mind to me first. This is not the original cover. The original cover is white, and it's called At JD's, and it has a different song on it. I don't remember the song that's missing. This one is called Crying and Waylon. This one is just called Old Waylon. But they both have the exact same songs and order. But like I said, I think there's 5 different covers for that album. An album you bought cheap that's not worth money. I mean, I don't know how cheap is. But this is the album that I have that's worth the most in my collection. This is the 13th Floor Elevators from here in Austin. This is their first stereo pressing release. I was lucky enough to see Rocky a few times here in Austin before he passed away. Favorite drummer? I'm not a big drummer guy. More guitar. You know, Doc Watson, Jerry Reed. Yeah, but this is my buddy Jordan Jones from his band Sound Team that got real popular in the early 2000s and signed to Capitol. Yeah, their kind of demise was Capitol. There's Jordan's drums on the back right there. The nail was the Capitol priced their album too high. I think there was a Metallica album that came out at the same time. And, yeah, it was priced too high and higher than the new Metallica album. Let's see, I think this is the 2020 album turning 20. I think this was released in CD in 2000. This is the Black Crowes, Jimmy Page. I love the Black Crowes. I've got their first album. And then a trilogy of albums. This one jumped out to me first. So, Black Sabbath. Alright, so that was my third take. So, you guys, thank you for watching, and have a good day.